Already messed up right at the start. All right. Welcome back. I'm a little late in sharing or doing this stream. If you're not familiar with the channel, for the past couple years, at least 2 years, maybe at this point, I've been sharing and reading through my gaming blog posts, specifically the quarterly posts where I write 1 to 2 or 3 or more paragraphs for every game that I finish during the year, any game that I roll credits on. I try to write a few words on each game, sort of sharing my impressions and thoughts. Some kind of turn into mini reviews. A lot of the time, it's just kind of like whatever I was feeling in the moment or whatever I felt compelled to kind of note about the game or write down. That's what I end up kind of sharing or writing on my blog posts. So um, this was for the months of, or it's Q4, so it's the fourth quarter of 2022. So this was the end of the year. These are all the games that kind of wrapped up for June, October, November, and December of last year. So the most relevant or the most recent games as of this recording. So I always start with an intro. Again, this is my blog, Unexpected Games. You can find the link to it on my About page on this Twitch channel. This will also be uploaded to my YouTube channel, Unexpected Games is what it's called as well. And that's sort of acting as an archive for now of most of my Twitch streams. So you can check that out if you feel like looking at the video format of whatever this is going to be. I still plan to do, it'll either be one stream or 2 more streams. I gave myself a personal deadline of next Sunday, so I think January 15th. Let me look at the clock. Yeah, January 15th for my Game of the Year post. And I also have kind of like a gaming in review for 2022 where I sort of write about a bunch of categories and things about games that I played during the year, but like games that I didn't finish. Not so much honorable mentions, but just things that like maybe would have made my top 10 list if I did happen to play them. So sort of like a coulda, woulda, shoulda sort of situation. So that'll either be two separate streams or videos or one video altogether. I haven't really decided yet. I am still sort of debating if I'm going to do a top 20 list, similar to Min Maxes, if you're familiar with them. They do a min and a max list, essentially. They do a top 20, arguably, where they do 2 10s, or they call it the 2 10s, but it's essentially a top 20 list. But I was almost considering doing a top 20 for 2022, just because of the 2 in 2022. So 2 top 10s or a top 20 list, if that makes any sense. It really doesn't. But it's more of the fact that there was so much good stuff I played this year, and I was having trouble making a top 10, and I felt weird, like not, what's the word I'm looking for? Not showcasing certain games or not talking about certain games that I felt pretty strongly about. So it'll either become a top 20 countdown, or it'll be a top 10 with 10 honorable mentions. So I haven't decided yet. I haven't even fully like confirmed what my game of the year is. It might be in this list. So again, these are the games I finished and played during the fourth quarter of 2022. So I start with an introduction. I won't read that. It's sort of just like a personal message to kind of kick off the quarter, like what I was doing or what I was busy with personally during that time of the year. There's also links to all the previous quarters that I wrote. So Q1, 2, and 3 of 2022 with all the games that I finished during those periods of the year, which also have archived videos on my YouTube channel. So there's writing and video format for both of, or all 3 of those. And that's mainly like the structure of the year for me in terms of like how I write, and like when I upload. So, all right, so let's begin with the 47th game of 2022 that I finished was Roar of Revenge. Developed by Seep, is a 2D action platformer that's clearly inspired by the NES era. It looks and feels like Castlevania, Rygar, and the arcade game Rastan, which I've never played. It's also reminiscent of Iron Sword, Wizards and Warriors 2, another 2D action platformer on the NES that few people seem to recall. It's a game on that I kind of grew up with, or my family had growing up, and it really reminded me of this game for whatever reason. Roar of Revenge is a simple game. You have an attack and jump button, and you can cast spells. And once you acquire particular items, the game's comprised of a handful of stages that are tackled in a linear fashion. Over the course of the game, your character gains new gear, which allows the player to solve simple traversal puzzles such as breaking special walls. The equipment even changes the appearance of your character sprite. So all the images I upload, by the way, that are on my blog, I try to capture whether it's video footage on during a stream, or I take pictures on like the in-game photo options for a lot of these modern systems. Um, so I always upload photos of my playthrough, so it's not just like pulled randomly from the internet. At least I try not to if I can't or if I can. So just to make it more personalized. A Roar of Revenge can be completed in a single sitting, and depending on how many deaths you rack up, you get to see more of the ending. If you die less than 10 times, you're rewarded with the full ending sequence. However, I only managed to complete the game with 12 deaths, so I saw the second best ending. There are countless retro-inspired Castlevania likes today, and while the saying "the more the merrier" rings true here, sometimes there can be too much of a good thing. It's really hard to say. Roar of Revenge doesn't overstay its welcome, so if you're not fatigued yet by the onslaught, indie games in the same vein, you could do worse than this game. The Platinum Trophy is also earned halfway through the game too, so if you're a trophy hunter, Roar of Revenge is an easy fix. So yeah, you get the Platinum in this game without even finishing it, which is a little ridiculous, I think. So they just kind of, this publisher is kind of known for that. Not that it's the developer's decision or not, I don't know. But uh, I did have a stream of this game, or I streamed most of this game. I didn't do a full playthrough, and I sometimes try to, or I've been trying to incorporate some of the game footage during these read-throughs. So I'm gonna pull from my YouTube channel in a second just to show like a little bit of it. But I don't have footage for all the games that I play because I don't stream everything that I play. But the next game also I streamed, so I'm just gonna read through that first. Yeah, Roar of Revenge, a decent little like 2D action platformer. I believe it's on most platforms at this point. I played it on PlayStation 5. I know it's on PC, so this was an interesting game. Dandy and Randy DX, the 48th game I completed in 2022. Developed by Asteristic Game Studio. It was a top-down 2D action adventure game by a Brazilian-based independent studio, which I thought was interesting. I love seeing games from parts of the world that don't really get represented too well, at least online or in conversations. It's apparently similar to the NES cult classic Goof Troop, which I also haven't played. A lot of these kind of classics that some of these games are inspired by, I never played. Just like Roar of Revenge, who also happen to be the same publisher, Dandy and Randy is a short and sweet retro-inspired romp. The game has a colorful look, a nice chiptune soundtrack, and some well-designed bosses. There are 6 theme worlds, and each level is filled with enemies, environmental hazards, and simple puzzles, which usually consist of pushing boxes or flipping switches, which isn't too exciting. You do obtain tools, which allows you to traverse and interact with stages in particular ways, such as a hook shot to cross gaps or a shovel to dig up items, but it's nothing you haven't seen before in other games of the sort. Most interesting thing about Dandy Randy is probably its room by room approach, a la The Legend of Zelda. Each island is comprised of interconnecting single fixed screens with shortcuts and a Zelda-like map to assist you with navigation. There's also a shop on each island where you can purchase items and max health upgrades. Although the game's currency is plentiful and nothing is too costly, so you won't spend a lot of time here. I completed the game at 100% and earned the Platinum Trophy after just an hour or two, so it's very short. Asteristic Game Studio seems like a competent developer, and it's always great to see what independent groups are creating from parts of the world that aren't always in the spotlight. So I'm looking forward to see what they can do next. I think so. If I go to my YouTube channel, again, Unexpected Games, the link's in the Twitch bio. If you want to give me a follow, I appreciate it. If not, it's fine. Let's see, when did I play this? Here we go. Yeah, just to give you an idea of what it looked like. Here was me playing Roar of Revenge over the summer, I think is when I played. No, not over the summer, because this is Q4. What am I talking about? This was during I was probably September, I guess. That's what it feels like when I played this. So yeah, fun little Castlevania like. It's very fair, surprisingly. Like it's not like a super long game. And the levels aren't super long either, so this level was confusing. Let's just hop around. That's when I popped the platinum trophy. It's kind of funny. So yeah, there's hundreds of games like this on Steam at this point, or like on any digital storefront. So um, if if you love Castlevania or games like that, and you just want something similar, then you can't. It's not bad. It's fairly decent. It's challenging, but it's fair. And then before that, the next game was that Dandy and Randy game, which is right here. This is when I played. I played it in the same stream. I think I finished the first world, but it's a screen by screen game. Has like a pretty decent look. You pick up. Um, you don't really have a weapon, I don't think. There's no sword or uh, primary way to attack, so everything you pick up is like throwable objects, and that's how you attack enemies. And like I said, the puzzles are very much just flip switches, uh, push blocks, push them on top of switches, like things like that. Uh, Throw items at, you know, unreachable switches. Do I have the boss in this trail? The bosses were like, yeah, bosses were easy, but they're cool. I'm just a sucker for like if you make a Zelda-like game or anything that's kind of reminiscent of Zelda, and you have cool bosses at the end of the level, I'll play it. And if it looks like this, like screen by screen, so you have like little ideas on each screen, and just try to mix it up. That's all you have to do. Then you get maps for the other islands in the game. So it was a cool little game. Very short. If you just want to kind of rack up clears for the year, I like playing shorter games, especially indie or if they're retro. If they're like I'm going back to play older games. Um, just kind of racking up. I love finishing things. So like if I can finish something in a sitting or two and kind of feel content and complete, after rolling the credits, that's more of where my mind has been over the past like 5-ish years. I still love my long RPGs and things like that, but if you can release like a really short indie game that's just like fun and competent, and has like, nice little ideas, then I'm kind of there. So we'll go back to this for the other games. Okay, big one. Game number 49 of 2022 is Splatoon 3. I actually wrote about, I did a separate article and stream on this game, and I made a YouTube video on it, kind of talking about like what could be next for the single player. So that's linked on here as well. But Splatoon 3, developed by Nintendo, is arguably Nintendo's most important IP to date. The series has sold extremely well worldwide, and in Japan, it's become a cultural phenomenon. Despite originally debuting on the Nintendo Wii U, Splatoon, like other games previously shipwrecked on Nintendo's failed platform, was given a second chance on the Nintendo Switch. While it's mostly known for its competitive multiplayer modes, the developers continue to provide single player experiences in an attempt to build the world around the competitive modes while simultaneously teaching players how to play the game. Splatoon's single player campaign has more or less been a glorified training tutorial for the multiplayer modes, but it could be so much more. I wrote more about the game here, so you can find the link on the actual blog post that I'll post or share after this. So I go kind of more in depth. So I didn't want to include all of that on this post. I think some of it I have it here too. But since Splatoon 2, each level can be tackled with different weapon choices. Splatoon 3 carries this idea forward, and after clearing every stage with every available weapon, I did learn which weapons I liked or disliked using for when I returned to the multiplayer. So perhaps that was the developers' intentions all along. For the completionists out there, if you do complete every stage in the game at least once and roll the credits, you unlock a secret bonus stage that's essentially Splatoon 3's Champions Road equivalent from Super Mario 3D World. This level, titled After Alterna, is a series of platforming and shooting sequences that tests the player's complete understanding of the game's core mechanics. It took me nearly 3 years to complete, and the reward, or 3 hours to complete, and the reward is a new badge or title for your profile and an additional lore entry for your log. It was one of the most challenging things I've accomplished all year, and it clearly showcases the potential of Splatoon's single-player gameplay. For the few people on the planet who care more about Splatoon's single-player experience than the multiplayer, I can confirm that there is no reward for completing every stage with every available weapon option, which I also did. I got pretty into the single player here. Splatoon 3 takes some conceptual, structural ideas from Splatoon 2's Octo expansion as well. Instead of using power eggs to upgrade your character's equipment, like in Splatoon 2 single player, they're used here to either clear the islands of the fuzzy goop that's impeding your progress, or for a small fee, they can be used to access particular stages. I think Splatoon 3 single player is a step in the right direction, and when it, not if, a Splatoon 4 releases, similar to how the Inklings evolved from the Ocean Squid, perhaps they will be ready for their next step in evolution. So I did have so again, my problem with Splatoon 3 is, and it's not really a problem, it's just kind of like we're 3 games in now, and the levels are like, as you can see here from the footage that I captured, they're essentially like obstacle courses that are like suspended in air. Like they're very much like, they feel like training courses and not like actual levels, even if that sort of makes sense in the game's universe. Like um I think if they could take like the Splatoon mechanics, and the world map in this game was the closest it got to kind of doing this. Um, if they could take the core Splatoon mechanics, like how it feels to play the game, how it feels to control the character, all of the kind of puzzle and platforming and shooting sequences that they uh, throw at you within like the kind of the separate main levels, if they just put all of that in like an overworld, or like a map that's the size of I used Bowser's Fury as an example. Like the world map in Splatoon 3, or like the levels, the larger areas that have all of the gates that lead to like the main levels, that was like the closest it's been to like being what I think it should be. Like if they took, instead of being transported to a level, what if you just took those ideas from the levels and put them in an overworld setting that was seamless, and you got to explore it without having to like, blast off and load into a traditional kind of like point A to point B stage. So I, I don't know if that's what they're, there could be hardware limitations for that, or maybe that's just not their vision or how they look at Splatoon, because it's primarily a multiplayer game. And the single player, like I said, it really is just training players to like learn how to play the game so they can succeed like in the multiplayer mode. So it it's a weird series for me because I really like the games, but I'm not like super hot on the multiplayer side of it. Like I think it's fun to mess around with, and I occasionally jump into it. But I'm usually there for the single player campaigns because the boss fights are always good. There's always some crazy spectacle at the end when the credits roll. The final boss sequences are always pretty memorable. But I just think they could do a lot more with the single player than like what they've been giving us for 3 installments now. So, like I said, it's like it's getting there. Like they have all the ideas, and it just seems like maybe their next hardware, or like Splatoon 4, might make that jump to something a little bit more ambitious. So we'll see. Neon White. The 50th game of 2022 was Neon White, uh, developed by Angel Matrix, and Ben Esposito is a frenetic, first-person genre-blending shooter of sorts. His giant bomb, unofficially coined Neon White, is a video game-ass video game. You play as White, a former assassin who, along with his cohorts, blew a mission big time during their final hours and found themselves dead. Chosen in purgatory to hunt demons in heaven, they're given a second chance at redemption. That's the gist of the game. The story is the least interesting thing about it. Oh, I should change that. It's too redundant. About it. I'll just say about instead of about the game. While the performances are mostly good, the dialogue comes off as extremely juvenile, almost like something you would see on Adult Swim. If I was a late teen or in my early 20s, some of the character interactions would have amused me today. But today, as a 30-something, I couldn't care less about the relationships here, although I am a sucker for nostalgic group photos that are in black and white, which this game does do, so it kind of got me. Some spoilers, by the way, for anything I'm talking about here. Very minor spoilers for some of these games. Unintentionally, I don't really, when I write about the games that I finished, I don't really go too super deep like on the story. I kind of write more mechanically. Neon White is an extremely fast-paced first-person shooter. The goal of the game is to make your way through a series of levels, all of which have a clear starting and end point. You're equipped with a sword that can be used to strike obstacles and enemies, but the real hook of the game are cards that you collect, which are essentially your weapons. What's interesting about these weapons or cards is that you can either use them to fire bullets or make use of their secondary traversal ability to navigate the stages. One weapon, a pistol, can be used to double jump, for example. Rocket launcher acts as a powerful weapon and a hook shot. Levels can sometimes last a minute or less, and the game emphasizes replaying stages for better scores and ranks. There's even global leaderboards if you want to get carried away with some competitive play. I completed the game at rank 1, which meant getting at least aces or golds in every level, and collected all of the gifts. When you collect gifts, they can be exchanged for additional lore and optional missions with your friends. The optional challenge stages are some of the best levels in the game too. Each character side missions throw a wrench in the game's core mechanics. For example, one set of levels doesn't allow the player to use the secondary traversal options on the weapons / cards. The soundtrack is exceptional too. Neon White feels like if Killer 7, if you're familiar with that game, collided with the Sega Dreamcast, and I mean that in the best way possible. One of my favorite games of the year, and I can't wait to see what Ben Esposito and the gang do next. I think I have footage of Neon White. Yeah, Neon White. It's going to be in my top 10 or top 20, like I mentioned at the start of the stream. I don't know what the position will be, but it'll be up there. This video will load. So I think what I'm doing here in this video that I captured is like looking for one of the secret items, maybe? Yeah, I'm looking for something. So what's really cool about this game is that like it seems overwhelming with how fast paced it is and all of the options you have with the cards that you collect. But if you're just playing the stages normally, all the cards that are thrown at you are expected to be used in the order that you receive them. So there's like maybe one or two instances I feel like where you have to maybe switch some of the cards around to like progress within the level. But for the most part, each card kind of like feeds into the next card, and you don't have to think about like, you don't have to stop essentially to switch cards. Like, oh, I need the pistol so I can double jump, or the Uzi or submachine gun or whatever to throw the orb that kind of boosts you up. Now the secret levels kind of break away from that and do kind of make you think outside of the box. And when you go for the gifts in the level, which are unlocked if you like finish the stage in a certain amount of time, those require you to sort of use the cards in a different order and almost like traverse the stage in a different approach. So I just playing through Neon White is awesome because like it might seem overwhelming, but it's so approachable. And once you play like a set of levels, at least play like the first world or the first chapter, which is like 10 levels technically, you'll realize very quickly that like all the cards that they throw at you, they're meant to be used in the order that you receive them. So it's just such a fast moving, like immediately satisfying game that has like a lot of nuance with like speed running and finding shortcuts, and soundtrack's awesome. It has like a unique look. It's just a cool game. I could do without the story and the characters. I wasn't as like offended by it as much as some other people were online, but I could take it or leave it. There were some cool little character interactions and moments, but I honestly would have, if they just removed all of the voice acting and dialogue and it was just kind of like a set of levels that you just kept going through, maybe make the story a little bit more mysterious and not so like text heavy, I think I would have maybe enjoyed it even more. So that was Neon White. Infernax. The 51st game that I finished 2022 was Infernax, developed by Berserk Studios, a 2D action platformer that wears its Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, and Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest inspiration very closely on its sleeves. It should just be on its sleeve. I don't know if that saying is like plural or singular. You'll travel from one town to the next, solving simple quests for townsfolk while upgrading your character along the way. Each of the game's main dungeons rewards players with new traversal abilities, such as the ability to dash or jump higher, that culminate in challenging boss encounters. One of the most interesting aspects of Infernax, however, is its mortality system, or sorry, morality system. Over the course of the game, you're presented with choices that will test your moral compass, which essentially boils down to either being good or evil. These decisions ultimately impact the game's ending, but depending on the choices you make, you'll encounter different characters, enemies, and scenarios, such as flooding a town by destroying a dam. There's also a day and night cycle where enemies become stronger, more frequent at night. Infernax is a gory, gruesome game. Enemies explode into guts when they're vanquished, and when you face off with boss characters, you're treated with exceptionally detailed portraits of the characters, some of which have their entrails and innards wrapped around their bodies. I completed the game on classic mode, which just means reloading at a save point when you die, and saw 2 of the endings, both of which were aligned with being good. There are multiple endings and incentives for replaying the game, but I had my fill after my initial playthrough. I will revisit the game down the road for an evil playthrough, but for now, I can't wait to see what these developers do next. Burnax, like, I started it, and I have footage of this game as well. I started it during the year. When did I play this? Is it like way earlier in the year? Oh wow, yeah. So I streamed this 8 months ago, and I remember not feeling super impressed by it at the start, and I played it during that stream, and then I never went back to it for months. And I came back to it, I guess, this last quarter, and I started it over from scratch, I think, and it clicked eventually. I think when I finished the first dungeon, got like my first power up, and maybe finished the first like main boss, like the structure of the game kind of like showed itself to me, and I'm like, okay, I really like this. And although it looks like Castlevania 2, like again, if you just didn't know anything about this game and you went to like the Steam store, or that death animation's so cool. um you watched the trailer from anywhere, Twitter, or you just came across it in your feed somewhere, you'd think this looks like probably again like 100 other games that look like this that are available on like any platform at this point. So again, like I just feel like we're inundated with like games that look like this, but not all of them are ever like this good. Like this game, for example, is like 100 times better than that Roar of Revenge game that I played before, that I was just talking about. So this one's, if you're gonna play any one game that kind of looks like this or fits that pocket of like 2D retro inspired, like Castlevania likes that has like some Metroid elements and some you know, Zelda 2 sort of influence. Uh you got to play this. This game's so solid. Like controls well, looks good. Like the dungeons are like perfectly sized. Uh it's challenging. There's two difficulties if it's too hard. Tons of like optional content. It's just really good. It'll probably be on my top 10. So I think we got some short ones coming up. So the 52nd, game 52 of 2022 was Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, developed by Snoozy Kazoo. Is a top-down 2D Zelda-like where you play as an onion who commits tax evasion, as the title suggests. It's a simple game with a few inputs. You can dash, attack, and interact with NPCs and objects. Most of the game has a player going on fetch quests, which usually results in the onion ripping up documents and being a nuisance. The game has a sense of humor, but it feels like it's one step away from using internet or meme humor. The game is comprised of mini dungeons with simple puzzles that culminate in boss encounters. I was actually having a lot of difficulty writing about this game. I don't know why. There are heart containers to collect, which increase your maximum health, hats to find, which change your appearance, and there's even a Lost Woods-like area straight out of a Zelda game. I completed the game at 100% with all of the achievements, but there's an endless roguelike dungeon found in the post-game where you can unlock even more hats. Turnip Boy is a simple, breezy experience that takes 3 to 5 hours to finish if you're going for 100% completion. I'm looking forward to the developer's next game, Turnip Boy Robs a Bank, I think it's what it's called. Uh, yeah, I was always turned off by the look of this game. Again, it looks like every other 2D. I just got done talking about that Dandy and Randy DX game was like what I finished earlier before this. And that was another kind of top-down, like sort of Zelda-like with some, you know, action adventure elements. And this is another game like that, totally different concept and you know, a different character, different developer and everything. But it just looks, so many of these indie games kind of like fill a certain pocket that all look the same. And there was something about the visuals in this game that turned me off like a year or so ago, because I think this is an older game, a little older, not too old. But it was on Game Pass, and I was just kind of like looking at what to try. And I'm like, I heard it was like a couple hours, so like maybe I'll just try to knock this out and see what it's like. And I actually really liked it. I'm not thrilled with the look of the game still. I think like it has that kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to call it like flash art because that's not fair, but it has just like that simple floaty kind of look and feel to it where you're like, I don't want to call it Newgrounds either. Like there's just like a very simple like web browsery feel, and it's such a bad way to describe it, but it's like it's the best kind of term I can apply to it, I guess. I don't know, but um it's actually really fun. Again, like it's very immediate. Like the map size is compact. Like every screen has like a purpose or an item or some sort of objective in it. There's very little wasted space, I guess you could say. Um, which you could also say about that Dandy and Randy game I just talked about. So I appreciate games that are like, if you're gonna make like a simple indie game like this, like just keep it compact and short and tight, and that's what this game was. So had some pretty funny boss encounters at the end. Like it gets pretty, the story's wild. Like the final boss sequence is pretty out of control. So it's kind of like a funny, ridiculous game. Oh my god. I did not stream this game, I don't think. Demon Throttle. Game 53 of 2022. Uh, Demon Throttle, developed by Doinksoft, is a 2D top-down. How many times I've said that? Auto-scrolling arcade shooter. Interestingly enough, Demon Throttle can only be purchased physically. The initial pre-order window has since passed, but apparently only 10,000 copies were made. I was fortunate enough to secure a copy at release, and the game comes in a special package from Special Reserve Games, which even includes a manual. Demon Throttle is a classic arcade shooter through and through. You play as two characters that you can switch between on the fly. A gunslinger who's lost his wife, and a vampire lady who's had her chalices stolen from an evil lord. The chalices are actually a big part of accessing the game's best ending. On each of the 4 levels, a secret staircase can be found, which leads the player to an underground area where the chalices can be collected. These hidden staircases are randomly placed during each playthrough, although there's only a few spots where you can appear in each stage, where they can appear in each stage, so it's not exactly roguelike. Like any other traditional arcade shooter, there are power-ups to increase your movement speed and attack power, including screen-clearing bombs to wipe out enemies in one fell swoop. My game pro tip: max out the Vampire Lady first, as a weapon is far more useful than the Gunslinger. I completed the game multiple times, one playthrough on hard difficulty and another run on normal with the true ending, which requires all of the chalices collected. Demon Throttle has a deceiving amount of content and replay value. The more you play the game, the more things you unlock, including a sound test, a bestiary, screen borders, and even new stage variants. Demon Throttle is one of the best games I've played all year. Got a killer soundtrack, solid gameplay, and an addicting hook, which with its unlocks and secrets. It's the ultimate just one more run game, and I couldn't put it down once it clicked. If you can still find a reasonably priced copy on eBay, or if Special Reserve Games put it back up for sale, I can't recommend it enough. I do have footage of this game, I believe. Demon Throttle's so good. This is the first boss fight in the game, but um, it's pretty tough out of the gate. But it's one of those games again where you kind of have to stick with it to kind of learn and meet it on its own terms. Like it's a single run game, so the second you game over, you gotta start the game from the beginning. But there's 4 levels. You finish it like in a half hour. Um, let me just get some footage. I keep skipping through the boss fights. Hold on, where's the warning that kind of freak out about? So this game, there it is. If you're not familiar with my channel, part of my channel is inspired by games like this. The kind of the theming and tone of the channel, Unexpected Enemy. Um, Part of the reason I came up with it was based on games like this. Traditionally, arcade shooters, older games like this, where at the end of a level, when you reach the boss of a stage, most of the games from that era will like splash a title card that says like, so and so battleship is fast approaching, or warning, a big boss is approaching, and blah blah blah. Like, and right here, literally does like exactly what I've been talking about, or exactly what sort of inspired this channel. So automatically, this game is my cup of tea, and no matter what, has to be on my top 10 list for the year, because that shit makes me go nuts. Uh, in a fun way. So yeah, Demon Throttle, if you can get your hands on it and you like kind of old school top down arcade scrolling shooters, which is a very specific thing. Um, the soundtrack's so good. It's so addicting once you learn how to play it. And it's one of those games like any good shooter where once you're fully powered up, you're like unstoppable. But the second you die, you might as well just start the whole game over. It's got that like Gradius sort of difficulty curve, where when you game over or you try to continue, you kind of reset your power level and like your bombs, your screen clearing bombs, all that kind of stuff. So um, learn how to play the game and just kind of keep playing it and stick through it. And I think it's really rewarding, and it's just like a cool game. It's got a good feel and just good vibes. Oh my god, Pac-Man World, Re-Pac. The 54th game of 2022, Pac-Man World Re-Pac, developed by Now Production. I might have that wrong. Namco Home Tech Inc. As a remake of a 3D platformer starring Pac-Man that originally released on the PlayStation 1. Pac-Man World isn't the first time Pac-Man has set out on an adventure outside of the arcade machine, but it's certainly a product of its time. Pac-Man World is a collectathon through and through. The game takes all of the basic ideas and elements from the arcade game, places them in a 3D platform that was very by the books. Although the game is 3D, the camera is fixed and follows the player as they move left to right, which makes it feel like a 2D game at times. I don't recall if the original version was like this, but the camera is far too close. The player's point of view can make precision platforming troublesome, especially due to the depth perception at play. Each level is filled with fruit, power pellets, and other items to collect. Fruit, once collected, can be used to open doors, which can hold keys, which are used to rescue your family members in particular stages. Letters that spell out Pac-Man and other goodies. The game is at its best when it turns parts of the level into what feels like a traditional Pac-Man arcade screen, however. I completed the game at 100%, but I'm still missing 2 trophies, one of which requires beating the original arcade version of Pac-Man. I had more fond memories of Pac-Man World on the PS1, but unlike Klonoa, the game hasn't aged well. I recall Pac-Man World 2 being a better game, so hopefully the game has done well enough to warrant a remake of the sequel. I have footage of this game as well. Try to speed this up a little bit. I I really liked this game as a kid or teenager whenever I played it. It's honestly sort of like a one-to-one remake, visually at least, and structurally. They've updated it and fixed a few things since when I first played it, but I mean, I've played far worse 3D platformers than this game, and it's a pretty novel idea to take, you know, a classic arcade character like Pac-Man and kind of throw him in like a traditional genre, like a 3D platformer. So it was cool for that kind of curiosity at the time. But and this level's not as bad, but some levels the camera's just so it's so close. Maybe it's here? Yeah, like look how I don't know. So whatever. And to me, like you're you're like a classic 3D platformer when you have to spell out the name of the character or you collect the letters of the character like Crash Bandicoot style. It's a to me that's a very old platformer thing and not like something um like Klonoa would never collect the letters that spell Klonoa in his game, if that makes sense. So I think it's a like it's a funny thing to kind of hone in on or to pick on this game for, but like to me, like your quality level of a platformer, like I don't want to call it a red flag, but there's a difference to me in quality if one of the main collectibles is the letters um of the character's name. Like that's truly a mascot platformer, whereas like Klonoa is a work of art. That's how that's the difference in my head. All right, Costume Quest, the 55th game completion of 2022. I finished Costume Quest and Grubbins on Ice, the DLC for it, developed by Double Fine as a turn-based RPG with splashes of Paper Mario and Earthbound. Costume Quest is a cozy adventure about kids going trick-or-treating on Halloween night. Almost immediately, the protagonist's sister gets captured while you're going door to door for candy, and from there, the story begins. The game has the clever and witty writing you'd come to expect from Double Fine, but also feels like it pays homage to classic RPGs from the past. The core of the game has you constructing costumes, which allows the player to don them during combat or use them for traversal or puzzle solving in the environment. One costume, for example, provides a shield over the player's head so they can pass through certain hazards, while another comes equipped with roller skates so that you can jump off of ramps to reach new areas. The battles are fairly easy, especially if you're collecting and doing every side quest along the way. There are stamps you can collect and equip with which grant the player with passive active abilities in combat too, similar to the badges from Paper Mario. I completed the base game and the DLC Grubbins on Ice at 100%. Completed all of the quests, maxed out my characters, collected everything there was to collect, and unlocked all of the achievements on Xbox 360, which I was playing backwards compatible on my Series X. The Grubbins on Ice DLC was essentially more of the same, but from a different perspective. It takes place in a monster town of sorts, and there are new costumes and badges to collect. It's as long as one of the main locations from the base game. It's worth playing if you want more candy in your pillowcase. I'm just trying to be cute there. Costume Quest is the perfect Halloween game, so I'm looking forward to playing the sequel next year in October. Yeah, Costume Quest was awesome. That was a game I downloaded and tried playing years ago when it was just released on Xbox 360. I never finished it back in the day when it launched, so I don't know why it took me so long because I love Double Fine. I usually like most of their games, if not all of them. It took me so long to come around to it. But I always try to save games like this, especially because this is a very like seriously geared towards Halloween, October, fall kind of game. So I save games like this for Halloween if I can pull it off or find time for it rather. Scorn. Scorn was the 56th completion of 2022, developed by Ebb Software. Is a first-person survival horror game that's clearly inspired by H.R. Geiger art. It's a disgusting, gross experience that takes the minimalistic approach in every aspect of its design and presentation. There's no dialogue or menus outside of the title screen and the various options and configurations you can toggle. This game is dripping with atmosphere, and it's a hard sell for non-horror enthusiasts. Some have compared it to Myst, but considering the game has combat and guns, it actually reminded me a bit of From Software's Shadow Tower Abyss for the PlayStation 2. If anyone's ever played that, you can only import it for now, or at the time you could only import it. It never was released in the US. Scorn is cryptic, but it's fairly linear, and the puzzles are mostly simple. The guns are weird, and fighting the monsters feels messy and janky, which makes sense considering you're playing as a skinned corpse of sorts. The biggest hurdle is right at the start of the game, however, and it's arguably the most confusing part of the short campaign. I also believe Scorn commits to the single shot approach more so than what this is a stretch to compare these two, but more so than what God of War 2018 originally promised. In Scorn, there's no inventory, and the heads up display is bare bones, pun intended. When you pull up your weapons and items, it's all in real time, which makes the game feel even more immersive. If anything, the game screen goes black or becomes consumed by light during particular sequences. But for the most part, I believe the game commits to the stylistic single shot approach. Scorn is a one and done experience, unfortunately. All but one achievement is earned just by playing the game normally. It's also about 4 to 5 hours long, so once you've seen the credits roll, there's really no reason to play the game again, unless you really like looking at grotesque art. I can't say I love Scorn, but I'm glad it exists, and I was happy to experience whatever it was trying to accomplish. Yeah, I didn't hate Scorn. It was kind of a little divisive when it launched. Where's that puzzle? I was stuck. Yeah, I was stuck on this for like what felt like an hour. This is the first major puzzle in the game. Like this game, if you're not familiar with this genre of games, like sort of like the adventure style, point and click, sort of cryptic puzzle style game, um, they just drop you into like a relatively large room with a bunch of things you can't interact with. Or that you try to interact with and they're confusing and they don't explain or clearly show what their use is. So you eventually arrive at this like wall with a crane and you have to move these kind of like stacks around, and there's some like visual cues sort of to show you what you have to do, but it's a lot of trial and error until you kind of figure out like, oh, this is what the game's asking me to do. And it's not something I normally would complain about. I was just surprised, I think, that the game starts like that, because honestly, the rest of the game doesn't have anything like this first like weird wall puzzle. So strange game. Visually, it looks awesome. If you like that kind of art, it's very atmospheric. There's like I said, no dialogue. Um, It's just really cool. I really liked it. I'm debating if it's gonna make my top. That won't be top 10, but um, I'm kind of curious. I hope they don't. These developers weren't like. I don't know how well it did. It was on Game Pass, but I hope they make something again, and maybe not take 7 years or however long this took to make. Because there's not a lot of games that are like this, so I appreciated it. All right. The next game, which is like night and day compared to the last few horror games I've been talking about. I finally played through Devotion, which is the 57th game of 2022 that I finished, developed by Red Candle Games, is arguably my favorite game of the year that I played for the first time that didn't technically release in 2022. Next to Ease 9, Monstrum 9. Devotion has a really interesting development history. It was previously removed from Steam in China, and today can only be purchased from the developer's website. You read more about it here, which I didn't link yet, so I got to do that. Devotion is a first person horror game that's beautifully paced with an amazing yet tragic story. The game takes place in one family's apartment during a particular periods of time. To unravel the mystery, the player must venture back and forth between various apartment rooms, solving puzzles and finding clues. There's a wonderful sense of place and devotion considering it takes place in one location. When you solve puzzles and venture between the rooms, newspaper clippings appear on the walls of the apartment complex, which reveals more of the events that took place. Devotion is a dark and depressing game that follows one family's downfall into despair. Despite taking place in Taiwan in the 1980s, the game feels extremely relatable, especially to someone like myself who also grew up in a somewhat broken family. While the game has its fair share of jump scares and classic horror tropes, there's so much more here under the surface that feels meaningful and inspired. There's so many memorable sequences too, like the storybook segment where the game turns into a 2D puzzle platformer that simply left me speechless. I streamed Devotion on my Twitch channel on Halloween night, and I finished the game in one sitting. It's only about 3 to 4 hours, and while there are notes that you can collect over the course of the game, there's no additional unlockables outside of a chapter select, which is always appreciated. If Devotion released in 2022, it easily would have made my top 10 list for the year. I can't wait to see what I'll say this developer does next. Yeah, Devotion, that was another game that I don't know why it took me so long. It's only been out for a couple years. But I guess since it had such a troubled release period, uh, it just took me a while to get around to it. And here, oh, I skipped right to. I'll just show you this is what the game normally looks like. So it's like a first person, you know, survival horror game. No combat. It's all puzzles and finding items and doing like Resident Evil style, like inspect the items and read files and look at clues and kind of like walk around until something happens sort of game. It's definitely like an unsettling game, and there's a lot of really uncomfortable jump scares. But it does things like this, which is a big spoiler. The game goes from looking like this, with like a realistic first person horror game, to this. And you're controlling that. It was like unbelievable. So I played their first game. They've only made two games, I think, technically, Detention and Devotion. I think they're working on a third game. Um, so I'm assuming their next game is going to be another horror game. But both of them are like perfect for what they were going for. So I can't recommend them enough. They're such good games. The Devotion was like it would be like top 5, honestly, if it came out this year. And I think it's gonna make my um favorite game of 2022 that I played for the first time that didn't release in 2022 category. So Horizon. Game 58 of 2022, Horizon Forbidden West. I didn't hate this game. I just like teasing it. All right, Horizon Forbidden West, developed by Guerrilla Games, is the follow-up to Zero Dawn, a post-apocalyptic action-adventure epic steeped in science fiction. Horizon Forbidden West starts in familiar territory, finds its stride halfway through, but ends on a somewhat disappointing note. The beginning area, the Daunt, which also acts as a tutorial of sorts, feels like an extremely condensed version of Zero Dawn. The majority of the game takes place in the West, however, as the player it has the player trekking across wastelands, deserts, and jungles in search of subordinate functions. The goal of the game is to collect parts of a fragmented AI in hopes of restoring Earth to its former glory. Various clans with their own cultures and beliefs have settled in these areas where these subordinates could be where these subordinate functions are housed, and that's where the majority of the game takes place. Forbidden West is a text-heavy game with a ton of characters, world building, and dialogue. Over the course of the game, you establish a base of sorts where people you recruit join your cause. Each main character, I'm going to say, similar. I haven't played this, and people bite my head off for it. Similar to Mass Effect. I think it's Mass Effect 2. Well, Mass Effect 2 has sort of like a recruitment base building thing. Each main character is fully voiced and fleshed out, almost to an overwhelming degree. After every major plot point, you can spend almost 30 minutes speaking with the inhabitants of your base, learning more about their past and how their stories relate to the bigger threat at hand. It's all very interesting, but a part of me just wanted to get on with the game after a certain point, despite how well written everything was. The game plays mostly similar to Zero Dawn, for better or worse. I don't find the combat particularly engaging in Horizon games, though. It lands somewhere between a Monster Hunter game and a strict character action game, but doesn't quite hit the mark in either approach. Forbidden West is also much more of an RPG this time around, too. Has an even stronger emphasis on gear and loot, including elemental attacks, status ailments, and exploiting enemy weaknesses. I played through the game on hard difficulty and rarely strayed away from the hunter's bow and its corresponding skill tree, however. There's a lot of tools and weapons in Forbidden West, including brand new additions like the Spear Thrower and Shredder Gauntlet. And while all of the combat options are welcomed, you're never really asked to make use of it all to take down the mechanical beasts. Perhaps any approach is viable, which isn't necessarily a bad thing either. My favorite part of Horizon Forbidden West was the second half of the game where Aloy tracks down the subordinate functions. It reminded me of a classic JRPG quest where your goal was to journey to a variety of exotic locales in search of elemental stones. It's a shame the game sort of nosedives into nonsensical sci-fi territory in the later half, but at least the performances and spectacle of it all remain strong in the final act. After 50 plus hours, I did enjoy my time spent with the game, and I'm looking forward to playing New Game Plus in the upcoming expansion, Burning Shores, soon. Horizon 3 seems inevitable, and I'm not exactly sure what I want out of the series at this point, so hopefully we're in for a surprise. I didn't stream any of this game this year, but I played it mostly offline, or I played the whole thing offline. Yeah, I like Horizon. I'm not obsessed with it. I think it's cool that it's at least a new IP, and I'm glad Guerrilla Games. Nothing against Killzone, but it's cool that they've sort of separated themselves from that, or at least doing something, at least visually more interesting now. I think my favorite thing about Horizon in general is just I like the design of the beasts and the machines a lot. I don't know if I like fighting them that often. And I like a lot of the world building, especially in Forbidden West compared to the first game. Um, there's a lot of cool and interesting conversations, but it it feels like we're kind of heading in like a Matrix trilogy direction in terms of like I don't know, without spoiling anything. It gets a little there's like a threat behind a threat, and as someone who plays Destiny, it's like a battle of light and dark, but like what's behind the darkness? Like there's always some other thing after something that seems like the main threat, and it's just kind of it's not very interesting. So maybe the third game will be, or maybe like the VR game that's coming out soon will reestablish like a new story thread or give insight on like where the series is going. I don't know, but still cool. I'm glad I played it. I love A Plague Tale. The 59th game of 2022. Ooh, did I forget? A Plague Tale Requiem, developed by Asobo Studio, is the sequel to A Plague Tale Innocence. Similar to games like Uncharted and The Last of Us, A Plague Tale is a third-person action-adventure game with a strong emphasis on story and characters. Requiem, similar to the first game, takes place during the French Inquisition and the Black Plague. With each new generation, it's always been about more pixels, polygons, higher frame rates, and better visuals. At the launch of the PS4, for example, Knack and Resogun were conversation pieces with the simple fact that they had a ton of polygons and pixel-like voxels on display, respectively. Never thought a generation later that the amount of rats on screen would be the next milestone in showcasing new hardware, yet here we are. The rats are back in A Plague Tale Requiem, and they're everywhere, but this time you have more tools to deal with them. When the game is not funneling the player from one rat-infested encounter to the next, you'll have the opportunity to explore the environment, find hidden items, discover side quests, and listen to additional dialogue that helps flesh out the world and its characters. If you've played Innocence, Requiem plays more or less the same. While A Plague Tale is arguably a stealth game at its core, you do have a variety of weapons at your disposal, including a crossbow, slingshot, and alchemy-related items. The biggest addition to the combat system is that you can now possess the rats to do your bidding. You can also kick enemies into piles of rats if you've unlocked the appropriate ability. Plague Tale Requiem does something smart with its character progression. Although they've introduced a variety of skill trees for Amicia, how you unlock new skills feels extremely organic compared to its contemporaries. Instead of pumping experience or skill points into your character skill trees like in other games, you'll naturally gain experience during combat encounters based on how you approach each scenario. So, say for example, if you stealth your way through a combat section, you'll gain more abilities that make sneaking more efficient. Although there is a menu that shows your progress, there's no experience bars or visual indicator filling up the screen while you play. So the immersion is rarely broken. Requiem looks like a true next-gen game, and while it has incredible art direction, the game still feels like it's structured like a game from the last generation or two. Just like their first game, the sequel is still chapter-based, complete with a chapter select so you can return to previous levels for missed collectibles. Some chapters are longer than others, but the game is quite lengthy and paced fairly well. During most chapters, big metal doors separate one major encounter from the next, and the sequence becomes a bit repetitive and predictable the further you progress. There's also a lot of sequences where you're shimming through small crevices, which from an armchair perspective feels like they're used to mask loading times. From an environmental artist point of view, however, these sequences funnel the player to some beautifully shot vistas, and the game is simply gorgeous. A Plague Tale Requiem is one of my favorite games of the year. One of the few games in 2022 that made me put the controller down just to soak in the atmosphere. The game is gorgeous, the cast and performances are stellar, the set pieces are impressive, and the combat is more refined than its predecessor. It also helps that Olivier Deriviere, I'm probably butchering the composer's name, once again did an amazing job with the soundtrack. I completed the game on hard difficulty, but didn't collect or upgrade everything there was to do. The ending was quite depressing, however, and they clearly leave the story open for future games. There's a new game plus mode to tackle down the road, so I'll definitely be taking another trip with Amicia and Hugo sometime soon. Yeah, A Plague Tale, I did stream like 2 hours of it. A Plague Tale's incredible. It's such a good series. If you like games like Uncharted and Last of Us, and you want something like a little bit more original that's not like zombie apocalypse, or Indiana Jones meets Tomb Raider or whatever. This is just a game where like you just want to walk. I just wanted to walk around and look at everything and just kind of like I said, or like I wrote, just kind of soak it all in and just take it all in. The game visually is like gorgeous. And the art direction's amazing. The character models are, the main character models are really well modeled. And it's just there's like just a good bond. Like older sister, younger brother. She's always holding his hand. Um and they have good character arcs. Like they go through a lot in this game, and the ending's really kind of messed up. Um and the game part of it, like I said, it feels a little dated at this point, but like what doesn't anymore. But visually, kind of like the feel of it or the look of it, it just feels like something from like a new generation, which is what I think most people, or at least how I feel, playing like a big budget AAA game on like PS5 or Series X. Like you want that game to kind of feel like it's made for the system, and this game feels like it was made for like the next gen hardware. So um the combat's better than it was in the original game, but still a little janky, a little messy. It's very stealth oriented, and the encounters are very like um not copy and paste, but like you start to see the way the like combat setup or the encounters that how the players like funneled into like combat encounters. It feels very like you kind of see behind the veil of like how areas are set up like sort of naturally versus like making a game out of it. It's hard to describe, but and it's not necessarily a problem. It's just something I noticed like the more I play, because it's a long game. It's like 20-ish hours. The more I played, the more I kind of saw through like the veil a little bit. But it's one of my favorite games of the year, easily. The 60th completion. I have to do the of 2022s. The 60th game I finished for 2022 was Bayonetta 3, developed by Platinum Games, the long-awaited, highly anticipated sequel fans have been waiting for. Right out of the gate, it's clear that Platinum Games had a lot of confidence and passion for what they were creating. With Bayonetta 3, each game in the series has always had an over-the-top, big set-piece style introduction sequence, and Bayonetta 3 is no different. The game starts strong and it rarely pumps the brakes. The music is incredible, the combat is arguably better than it's ever been, the set pieces are super ambitious, and the enemies are still introduced and encapsulated in a classy looking book. With that said, after a very long development cycle and some PR drama leading up to the release of the game, Bayonetta 3 delivers and provides a satisfying conclusion, but not without a few missteps along the way. Um, One of Bayonetta 3's biggest problems is that it feels like it's trying to do too much, and by no fault to the developer, it also feels like it's limited by the hardware of choice. Bayonetta 3 is both a multiverse and globe-trotting game. Similar to the previous games, Bayonetta 3 reaches its climax four to five times over the course of its 20-some chapters. Each four chapters has the player visiting new locations around the world. Ooh, spelling around the world. Meeting new Bayonettas with their own personalities and weapons, culminating in epic boss fights that each feel like final bosses from any other game. The combat is still at its best when you're playing as Bayonetta, but this time you can call kaiju-like demons to fight alongside you. While the screen can feel busy and cluttered at times, incorporating giant beasts into Bayonetta's traditional character action game combat was so eloquently implemented, and no one but Platinum Games could have pulled it off. Bayonetta 3 is also incredibly ambitious, and I feel that it deserves to be praised for the risks it took. It's clear that Platinum Games had to make concessions when bringing Bayonetta back to the Switch, unfortunately. The environments can look a little drab or colorless, but it's not without some great art direction or cinematic direction. Yuji Shimomura and company did an amazing job with cutscenes and cinematic choreography in Bayonetta 3, despite some of the bland environments. The artist did a decent job highlighting certain areas to cover the blemishes. The smoke coming out of destroyed buildings in the Tokyo chapters, for example, have streaks of neon green running through them, which gives the destruction some extra flair. Can we also talk about the amazing soundtrack, specifically the battle theme, which I won't play here because I probably would get muted. Every time it starts, it sends chills down my body and fills me with adrenaline. I can't not play this game unless my speakers are blasting. My room was so loud when I started this game. Like the first chapter, just the introduction sequence, like the title card sequence, and the first like major real chapter of this game on the boat, where Bayonetta is like, the tidal wave comes in and the evasion happens, and she's like, dancing on the boat in her like Statue of Liberty dress. It's ridiculous. It's so good. Bayonetta 3 introduces a new playable character, Viola, who is simply a not as fun to play Nero from the more recent Devil May Cry games. She's sort of a wannabe Travis Touchdown from No More Heroes who doesn't feel as snappy as Bayonetta. Her witch time also requires an almost perfect parry to initiate, which can lead to some extremely frustrating moments during combat, especially if you're trying to complete all of the optional challenge verses. In pure Platinum Games fashion, there are also a ton of alternative gameplay modes and mini games spread throughout the campaign, including a scenario where you play as Jean in a sort of 2D espionage-like series of missions. None of these side diversions are necessarily bad, and none of it compares to the horribly dated QTEs from the first game that could ruin an entire pure Platinum run of a mission. But most fans just wanted more Bayonetta, and she's surprisingly not as present here. Platinum Games also has been carrying a particular torch from the PS2 Capcom Clover Studios era. It's a flame that I can't quite put out. Even with all of its missteps and questionable decisions, Bayonetta 3 kept me up past my bedtime, and as a mid-30 something, I can't say that for a lot of games today. The final sequence and ending left me a bit choked up and teary-eyed for reasons I won't spoil here, but the future looks bright for Bayonetta and friends, and I can't wait to see where they go next with the franchise. I streamed a good amount of this game during my charity stream. Well, I did do an initial impressions as well. This intro cutscene like sealed the deal for me. It's all I really needed, to be honest. The thing I love about Bayonetta games and what Platinum Games does, at least with Bayonetta, I guess, is like this is such a PlayStation 2 era like attitude or cutscene style that like not a lot of developers are doing anymore. And you could say that they're kind of dated or behind, or they're stubbornly kind of making games that don't feel modern, which is why I like them though. So even though Bayonetta, different voice actress, which is a whole other drama thing, but the way she carries herself in this intro scene is like what Bayonetta means to me, and they just nailed it. Like how they integrate or transition from like a ridiculous set piece over the top cinematic to the introduction of the new enemy types, and they're still using it's like almost like a wall scroll this time. But my favorite thing about Bayonetta games is like their attention to detail in terms of like introducing an enemy. Like no one introduces an enemy like Platinum Games, and no one introduces an enemy like a Bayonetta game does. So like any other action game or a lot of other games that you might play, you might just say the game starts first mission or first area. It's a game that has monsters in it or enemies in it. You walk into the area and the monster's just there. They might do like a cutscene to introduce them, but usually a lot of games don't bother with stuff like that. Let me just skip to that really quick. I don't know when it happened. Here we go. Right here. It's this like title. That whole sequence. That's all I need. If you're gonna if to me making a big deal about the enemies you're fighting means you care a lot about like what you're presenting to the player. Like the enemy types in this game have like a kind of a theme behind them or like a consistent look. And again, like light humanoid, generic module, Stratus. Hey, Quasi. All good. Yeah, I'm just going through my quarterly finishes from Q4 of last year. So everything that I finished from October, November, and December. So I'm almost at the end, but I'm hanging in. I'm freaking out about Bayonetta 3. That's what I just got up to talking about or writing about. So anyway, the first Bayonetta game did this. They had a book, like the Angel or the Demon book, or I think it was the Angel book technically. And it's like capturing the enemy, giving them a title and a hierarchy and like a structure within the enemy ranks, and then like wrapping it up in like a really perfect presentation bow or package. Like, it's like a gift. Like this enemy introduction is like a gift to the player. And look how like eloquently it scrolls up and just like flies into the screen, and it cuts back to the like get the fuck out of here. As disappointing as some things may have been for fans or longtime fans or what people expected Bayonetta 3 to be, like this intro scene, that's all I needed. Even if some of the rest of the game is a little disappointing or the ending's kind of questionable, and Viola is not like a really fun character to play as, like when you're Bayonetta or when Bayonetta is on screen, it's magic. All right, enough about Bayonetta. Somerville was the 61st game that I finished of 2022, and I keep forgetting to. I think I did that for the rest of my games, right? Yeah, okay. I'm glad I'm catching that, not that it matters too much. All right, Somerville, developed by Jumpship, is the debut indie game from a new studio lead by one of the co-founders of Playdead, of Limbo Inside fame. While not as polished as the aforementioned titles, Somerville is the type of game I wish we could get more often, although I imagine these types of games aren't easy to make. It's a minimalistic adventure game set in a sci-fi post-apocalyptic world. There's no dialogue or written text. Everything is told through environmental storytelling and audiovisual cues. If you're not familiar with the subgenre, Somerville is rooted in games like Out of This World, / Another World, Heart of Darkness, or even Flashback, otherwise known as the Book of Eric Chahi? I think is how you say his name. Each year, I'm always waiting for games to make me put the controller down so that I can soak in the atmosphere. When I arrive at these moments in a game, it's typically accompanied by a piece of music, atmospheric ambiance, or a beautiful visual that makes me go, whoa, wait a minute. Whoa, wait a minute. Somerville eases players into these types of moments frequently, and the game even rewards you with different endings or achievements for quite literally sitting down in certain places and doing nothing. Yeah, cinematic platformers. I should throw that in here. That's what I've been. Someone had that in their Game of the Year discussion, some website or group. I forget who I was listening to. I'll say is rooted in cinematic platformer, like Out of This World, Heart of Darkness, yada yada yada. Even Odd World to a degree. This is a mild spoiler. That's not really spoilers, but I marked it as spoilers. The sound design in Somerville is out of this world. One sequence that left a lasting impression on me outside of the introduction was relatively early in the game. The player makes their way through what appears to be a county fair parking lot. As you approach a stage, tables with closed beach umbrellas sit off to the side of the tent, or side of a tent. As you make your way towards them, a giant purple light bathes the area. The wind from the light causes the umbrellas to open and close on set intervals, providing cover for the player to progress. I couldn't stop thinking about Nope during this sequence. If you've seen the movie, you'll understand. Eventually, you'll find yourself at a set of trailers with their shutters open. After solving a simple puzzle to close the shutters, you hop into them to cover yourself from the bad light. The sound within closed spaces is properly dampened, and as the light hits the trailers, the shutters begin to shake with intensity. If you're wearing headphones or have a speaker system or sound bar, you're in for an eargasm. That's the end of the spoilers. Somerville is an audio-visual tour de force, but it's clear the game could have had used a bit more time in the oven. Unlike Limbo or Inside, Somerville is a 3D game, and although it still uses fixed or dynamic camera angles, the game's pathing could have been a bit better. I often found myself unsure how to proceed because of the camera perspective, and at times I found myself getting stuck in the geometry, which resulted in restarting a checkpoint. Objects that could be interacted with are painted or highlighted in orange, but it's a subtle shade that doesn't feel overly obvious. The game is fairly linear, despite taking place in bigger spaces, but there are some hidden areas that lead to even more confusing secrets that tie into a much bigger puzzle for one of the game's endings. While the pathfinding could have been better, the environmental puzzles are mostly simple and satisfying to complete. Without spoiling too much, the game makes use of lighting in interesting ways, and unlike a lot of games in this subgenre, your character does gain powers over the course of the game, although they're never used to their fullest potential. Despite some rough edges, I really liked Somerville. It's my Little Nightmares 2 of 2022. It's also the perfect Game Pass game as you can finish it in about 3 to 4 hours. I can't imagine these games are easy to make, but when they come around, especially if they're done right or from a studio with a pedigree for it, there's really nothing else like it. I did not have a stream. I wasn't streaming at this point when I finished this game, so no footage to show it. But very divisive game. So a lot of people seem to be really disappointed with it. I didn't really have much expectations going in, so I was really pleasantly surprised by it. I really liked it. It's rough. It could be a lot better than it is, but I think it's worth playing if you like the genre a lot. The cinematic platformer genre. I'm not gonna read through this. Babylon's Fall. A very little thing about it. The Babylon's Fall. Yeah, it's hard to follow up Inside Quasi. Or a lot of the classics, like Another World. And even though it was just done by like a producer of Inside, I think. So it wasn't even like a core member, I believe. I could be wrong. That's what I seem to be gathering from people talking about the game is like it's not like a main developer or creative lead from the Inside team or from Playdead, so but it feels like a game that they would have made. That's the problem. Or not really a problem, but that's like what that Somerville is. Like if you didn't know any better, you would have thought it was like a follow-up to Inside. The 60-second game I technically finished for 2022 was Babylon's Fall, developed by Platinum Games. The developers' failed endeavor into the MMO live service game space. I wrote more about it here. There's a link to a larger blog piece that I wrote. But at the end of February 2023, so in about a month and some change, the servers will go offline and players will no longer be able to play the game. I did manage to finish all 3 story campaigns in addition to obtaining the Platinum Trophy, however. If you're reading this after the fact or the actual blog piece itself, there is a link to the article for Babylon's Fall. I'm not going to read through it here because honestly, it doesn't matter. The game's going away. You won't be able to play it in 2 months. Long story short, I'm kind of bummed to see it go. I think there were some neat ideas, and it was just like maybe not respectable. It was a nice effort from Platinum to kind of like take on a Destiny like, or make a game like Destiny or a live service game. Traditionally, it seems like Japanese developers haven't quite like figured that space out yet. So I think there's some lessons to be learned from Babylon's Fall, so it's not all for nothing. When I'm gonna have to do this sweaty Destiny 2 thing another time, I think. Quasi, sorry. I actually been meaning to disable that. That's okay. I appreciate it. So that was an old. It just means I would stop the stream to play ranked, like 3 ranked matches of Destiny 2. I understand, yeah. I need to come up with better things for people to redeem their channel points for, because I don't know, it's like it's an afterthought. Some of the ideas that are still there, that are still active on the channel, were sort of like not fully thought out ideas, so I still appreciate you using them. All right, we're at the last 2 games. The 63rd game I finished in 2022 was Sonic Frontiers. Developed by Sonic Team. It's sort of a mess, but I felt compelled to see it to the end. I guess I liked it well enough to obtain the Platinum Trophy, but it's also not a very difficult game to complete. Although the game justifies its aesthetic or look narratively, I still don't generally like the game's presentation. While the open zone approach grew on me the further I progressed, the layout of each island just felt sloppy. When the map is fully uncovered, I think the designers did a good job at funneling the player from one platform sequence to the next. With that said, there are some instances where a platform sequence in the open zone will lock the player into a 2D lane, and it's extremely disorienting. There's no visual indicator for when this occurs, so it all just feels really jarring when you stumble into one of these instances. Sonic has a robust move set this time around with dodges and a parry mechanic, but I don't think character action game mechanics fit the blue blur either. There are some interesting enemy or boss designs which do make use of your abilities, but it feels like someone did an initial pass on the mechanics and they never went back to polish or iterate on anything. And that's honestly a sentiment I feel carries throughout the entirety of the game. The shadow of the classes like Titans aren't particularly satisfying to scale, as you'll find yourself boosting or falling off of these monstrosities more often than not due to the controls. The traditional cyberspace 30 Sonic levels were mostly disappointing too. These stages vary in length and difficulty, but it all just feels wildly inconsistent. Thematically, they look like stages from Sonic's previous games. You have Green Hill Zone, Chemical Plant Zone, etc. And again, there's some silly story reason for why that is. The collectible red rings are easy to collect, and they are almost always on the critical path. The S ranks, outside of a few, are also incredibly easy to earn. I still think the controls don't feel right in cyberspace, but after sinking 30 plus hours into the game, I'm still not sure why. The soundtrack at least is decent. Each level has its own unique theme, which is appreciated. There are also quite a few vocal tracks, and I'm always down for the melodrama that comes with them. I wrote a lot about this. Finally, let's talk about the fishing minigame with Big the Cat. Although it was sort of a janky, confusing mess in Sonic Adventure, there was a degree of nuance to catch the fish. The fishing in Frontiers, however, is a glorified QTE. You cast your lure, wait for a bite, hit a button, and then time another button press as a smaller ring overlaps a larger ring. You don't even have to reel the fish in. This fishing minigame also destroys any attempt at making an in-game economy that feels rewarding. You can trade tokens you earn from fishing for a variety of items, many of which can be used to upgrade Sonic stats. The problem is these items can also be found in the open zone, but they're not easy to come by. At Big's Pond, however, they're in an abundance. If you collect enough purple coins in the open zone, which are needed to go fishing, and are also easy to collect, you can max out Sonic's capabilities relatively fast by simply fishing for an hour or two. Such a weird game. Sonic Frontiers is a decent attempt at redirecting the course of the franchise, but I'm not sure if this is the path it should stay on. The game's filled with callbacks and references to previous games, and it's nice to see Sonic Team attempt to bridge all of the stories together, but the game itself is a mess. Most of the new ideas felt half-baked, and other things I liked about modern 3D Sonic titles that are present here just don't hold up to games like Sonic Generations, Colors, or Unleashed. I'm torn on Sonic Frontiers. I don't hate it. I don't think it's the best 3D Sonic game even in the past 10 years. Like I said, I think Generations, Colors, and Unleashed, I'd much rather play them or go back to them than even think about like replaying this game. This is a one and done for me. I'll check out the DLC that they add over time. If it's substantial or not, I don't know. But I don't know. I liked it well. Like I said, like I liked it well enough that I 100%ed it pretty quickly. I think the 3D levels are really not great, to be honest. I think they're super disappointing compared to the traditional 3D Sonic stages found in like the more recent titles. And the open world stuff just feels like a sort of like a proof of concept that's very messy and very janky feeling. But it does feel good generally. Once you get to a certain point, I'd say the more of the islands you unlock, the game feels better to traverse. Like it feels better to control Sonic once you A, unlock more abilities, and B, yeah. Hey, I hope that worked. That sound clip worked. Um when you unlock more of the zones or the islands, they add in more like bounce pads and rails, and everything sort of gets connected over time. So when you first start out, the island feels like a total mess. Um, yeah, I heard it on my end, but it might be too low. I don't know. I gotta redo. If you've noticed, well, Quasi, I also added new follower emotes. If you even looked, and I don't know if you noticed, but my background's sort of like um there's a filter on it, so it's kind of like moving, shifting diagonally to give it more of like a vibrant feel or a more like alive stream, or kind of it feeds into the whole like unexpected enemy, um like the warning screens kind of like shifting or moving in the background. Hopefully it's not too nauseating. Anyway, Sonic Frontiers, uh It's okay. I think if you haven't played a 3D Sonic game in a long time, it's kind of, I feel like it's tricking people into thinking it's good or that it's better. But if you're like a 3D platformer fan or a Sonic fan, I would imagine, like, if you're a hardcore fan, maybe you found a lot of this game kind of disappointing. But maybe a sequel will turn things around. I don't know. And then, maybe surprisingly or unsurprisingly, the last game I finished in 2022 and the 64th completion, give or take. So I rolled credits technically on 64 games last year. God of War Ragnarok, developed by Santa Monica Studio, is the follow up to the 2018 reboot of sorts, God of War. Taking place shortly after the events of the first game, Kratos and Atreus must continue their journey in hopes of preventing Ragnarok, as the name implies. Ragnarok feels like an impossible game to compete with in terms of budget and production values. The game is simply gorgeous, the performances are compelling, the side quests are meaningful, the soundtrack by Bear McCreary is epic, and the game just feels like a premium experience that you can't find anywhere else. I love character action games, and as someone who grew up playing the original God of War games on the PS2, along with games like Devil May Cry, God of War has always occupied a space in my mind that I liked and appreciated but did not love. These recent God of War games are becoming much more RPG-ish than what's typically expected from the character action genre. There's just too much focus on gear, loot, and color-coded enemies, which isn't a direction I particularly resonate with. Ragnarok is also guilty of what seems to be the latest trend in Sony's first-party AAA titles, and that's the desire to record copious amounts of flavor dialogue, which inadvertently ruins parts of the gameplay experience. Similar to the issues found in Horizon Forbidden West at launch, characters just do not shut up in Ragnarok. You'll often run into a new area where an environmental puzzle exists, and before the player can even scope out the environment for themselves, the NPCs who are accompanying you at the time will simply tell you what you need to do. I understand why the developers chose to do this, but if there were options to turn it off or lessen the occurrences, uh, it would have been appreciated. I'm not talking about all the accessibility options, which are great. With that said, it's impressive how much conditional dialogue there is in Ragnarok. The first game incorporated a lot of conversations during travel based on what was happening during the story or the quests you completed, but it seems much more abundant here. The thing I'm most disappointed with in Ragnarok is how it doesn't feel like it utilizes the power of the PS5, perhaps due to the fact that it had to be developed for the PS4 as well. The promise of no load times, seamless environments, and other next-gen features feels lacking here, although the loading is very fast on the PS5 and the haptics feels good. There are traces of what could have been in the Vanaheim realm, which gives the player the ability to change the time of day. It's arguably the most interesting area in the game. The sequence is visually incredible, and while it happens in real time without any cuts, you have to be stationary at predetermined altars to activate it. Certain areas become accessible or inaccessible depending on the time of day, too, and maybe wonder if this mechanic could have been implemented in other realms, perhaps at any moment, instead of how it's currently implemented due to the previous generation's hardware limits. There's just a typo there. Let me fix that. Okay. I obviously didn't work on the game, but perhaps this wasn't their vision for the entire game, and it just suited the Vanaheim realm instead. Although the game had to release on the PS4, still impressive what they pulled off here, considering it's a multi-platform game. I completed the game on no mercy difficulty, which is the second highest available, and it felt like a perfectly balanced challenge. Ragnarok is ridiculously polished, almost to a fault. From my experience, as you're making your way through the story, if you do as much of the side content that's available, you're almost always prepared for anything the game throws at you. Ragnarok also has a ton of great boss encounters, but they're far more forgiving here, considering the game lets you checkpoint during multiple phases of particular encounters instead of always starting over at the beginning of the fight if you die. It felt like the developers really wanted people to see the end of their game, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's a decision I felt somewhat conflicted on. Ragnarok at times feels too linear, even when the game allows you to explore. I felt like there was always a guiding force at play, and I'm not talking about the quest markers that dot the somewhat confusing map. I liked Ragnarok well enough, and I'm glad I got to play before the year's end. It still feels good to toss and retrieve the Leviathan axe, swing the blades of chaos around, and smash treasure chests with your bare fists. And isn't that all that matters at the end of the day? So yeah, no footage on this game either. I was away when I finished it. Um, yeah, God of War's it's good. Obviously, it's a great series. Um, I think I prefer the reboot, like the 2018 game and Ragnarok, to like the original trilogy or the original PS2 games than the PS3 games, I guess. Um, I don't know. I'm always gonna like God of War just because, like I said, it's a character action game at its core. Like games like Bayonetta, Ninja Gaiden, Devil May Cry. Yeah. Yes, Kratos and Thor were very what's the word I'm looking for? Well, what you said, Quasi. Um, so they're because they're character action games at their core, and that's like one of my favorite genres or subgenres. I'm always gonna like um God of War like on a base level. And I think this game was like sort of a necessary release in terms of like I don't I don't get the vibe that they got to do what they wanted to do with a follow-up to this game, and it feels more like an answer to PS5's not being so easily ready to purchase, and there being a huge PS4 install base still, considering the game again, it released for both PS4 and 5. And I don't want to be one to say, because I don't really know, that like did PS4 really hold back what this game could have been? Maybe. Like I said, there's a certain realm, the one I wrote about, Vanaheim, um, where there's hints of like a bigger scope or like a bigger picture of what, at least mechanically, a sequel to the 2018 God of War could have been. Um, because it really does feel very similar to the original game back on PS4, at least structurally. So I was just disappointed that there's nothing about this game that made me feel like I'm playing it on next gen hardware. Like it looks incredible still. Like the environments are beautifully modeled. The characters look great. Again, the performances and the dialogue and the writing is excellent. Um, and there's a lot of content here. Obviously, it's not like it's not a short game or anything, so it doesn't feel like it's lacking in content or value. But um, I was just disappointed that like when I got my PS5 and I played Astro's Playroom and the controller felt amazing and all the things it did with like the adaptive triggers and the haptics feedbacks on the controller and the the seamless or the like the zero load times even though the load times are very short in Ragnarok. Spider-Man Miles Morales on PS5 kind of introduced like seamless going into and out of buildings and there being like no load times or transitions and fast traveling instantly. And again, Horizon Forbidden West did that. Yeah, Astro's Playroom's still like like it's like my favorite PS5 game still. I'm just waiting for them to make a new PSVR 2 game or announce whatever they're working on. Asobi Studio or Team Asobi, whatever they're called. Um, but like I think about Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart a lot and how that game's gimmick was you're going in and out of portals and the load times are immediate and we can jump from one thing to the next and blah blah blah. And that was like the pocket dimension stuff was like kind of impressive at the beginning and then it's you sort of like got used to it and it wasn't as like impressive once you finished that game. But um that game's like promise of like the SSD on the PS5 and all the things like new hardware can do. Like I didn't see that in God of War Ragnarok, any of that kind of stuff. So unless I'm just not knowledgeable enough in terms of like, oh yeah, that game's doing things that like only can be done. Well, it's really not because it's also on PS4. So it's not like it's not like it's doing things that can only be done on PS5. And I don't want to hold that to it completely because the game's good. Like it does a lot of really interesting things, at least narratively as well. Um, so yeah, I was looking forward to it. I'm not like a super God of War fan, like I said. I much prefer, honestly, I like Bayonetta 3 way more than God of War Ragnarok, which I know a lot of people would bite my head off for saying that. But yeah, I'm glad I played it. I'm curious to see where it goes from here. If we're just gonna get a game focused on the son, Atreus, Or if Kratos is going to be back, I don't know. So that's everything that I finished during the fourth quarter of 2022. So that was October, November, and December of last year. So these past 3 months. So again, just to summarize, that was God of War Ragnarok, Sonic Frontiers, Babylon's Fall, which arguably doesn't end, but the servers are going offline, so it's ending. Somerville, Bayonetta 3, A Plague Tale Requiem, Horizon Forbidden West, Devotion, Scorn, Costume Quest and the DLC, Pac-Man World Re-Pac, Demon Throttle, Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, Infernax, Neon White, Splatoon 3, Dandy and Randy DX, and Roar of Revenge. So I finished a lot. And to be fair, these weren't games that I exclusively started in the fourth quarter. A lot of these games I had in progress from earlier in the year. Some of these games did release in the fourth quarter, but some games I did start for the first time, like between October and December. Like Horizon Forbidden West, that came out in February. I've been playing that all year, and I just happened to finish it during the fourth quarter. So, um, yeah, that's everything that I played and finished during Q4 of 2022. So that's all 4 quarters. I've written about 64. I wrote at least 2 to 3 paragraphs for 64 games in 2022. So I feel pretty okay about that, I guess. Maybe not the most interesting notes about these games, but at least my experience from them, whatever I felt compelled to write about. I'm on Twitter still, Quasi. Well, my links, I think you've sent me some stuff on there before. When my link to my Twitter, I'm not using Twitter as much as I used to. I'm still just mainly using it for game completion tracking. Um, but the link to my Twitter should be on the main Twitch channel. But anyway, um, I still arguably have to release and stream my top 10 games of 2022. I did say at the start of the stream, I'm kind of compiling either a top 20 or I'll do 10 honorable mentions and 10, like a traditional top 10 list, just because there was so much stuff I played this year that I really liked. And it's really hard for me to just boil it down to 10. To save time, because I'm a little like writer's blocked out, and it's hard to kind of rewrite about games that I've played and that I really like. Ideally, I'd love to write just like a paragraph about my top 10 games, but I think just to simplify it, I'm gonna just copy and paste what I wrote during each quarter post and make that the writing for the top 10 list for like the respective games. So it's not as exciting, so it's sort of like I'm rereading or repeating myself. But I'm gonna hopefully have that ready by next Sunday. So a week from now, January 15th is my personal cutoff for talking about the games that I played during 2022, because we're kind of getting halfway through January at that point. And although I think any time of the year is fair game to talk about like what released during said year, in terms of like lists and sort of like the zeitgeist and just where people's minds are, like everyone's sort of like, most people look forward and rarely look back, which I think is unfortunate, but I understand like that's just the reality of things. But um, there's so much good stuff coming out this year that like talking about 2022 games is going to get very crowded soon and not super interesting with things like Street Fighter 6 and Final Fantasy 16 and Tears of the Kingdom and all that stuff coming out. So so in addition to my top 20 or top 10 list stream, which will be an individual stream next Sunday, hopefully, I do have like a gaming and review stream or writing or post, so it's like a two-parter sort of game of the year um, thing that I do or that I write up. And the second part, which should come before the list, is sort of like everything about the year of 2022 in terms of like what I played or what I didn't play even, or games that I started but fell off. All of that gets kind of like thrown into this like secondary post about things, what games I wish I would have played, or games that maybe would have made my top 10, or my favorite ongoing game, or my favorite DLCs that I played. So that's going to get added to like a separate post in addition to the traditional game of the year list. So we'll go from there. But yeah, thanks for stopping in, Quasi. If anyone's watching this after the fact, the YouTube archive will go up later at some point for this stream. All the other quarterly posts are linked from this post, in addition to the archived videos or on my YouTube channel. If anyone wants to subscribe to that, I appreciate it. If not, I understand. But that's all I have for now.